Today I'm going to be painting this countryside autumn road scene and explaining my process as I go. So I'm just putting in a simple background here with light down the bottom and a bit of blue up top, quite simple. And on another layer I'm blocking in the side walls. You can't really see too much detail on those, so I just keep them nice and dark. You want to pay attention to the perspective when you do things like this. So I'm not trying to match the reference exactly, but I do want it roughly correct. So my first job is to block in some shapes. So I'm using the freehand color fill tool in Procreate, which allows me to get some big shapes in with varying colors quickly and not worrying about the detail so much. So this is quite tricky, this reference photo, because you can't really see the trees. They all kind of blend into one. So what I really do is just have a variety of colors, and I don't really worry too much about the shapes or the detail. I just try and blob in some general outlines of where I want the leaves to go. And I make sure to change the colors. If you do this, change the colors only very slightly. You don't want them to be completely different, or they'll look a bit weird. So I'm adding some trees here to break up these big shapes. Again, I'm not copying the reference exactly. I'm just putting roughly where. So we got about 2 or 3 big trees or tree trunks. So I get those in, making sure to keep them very dark at this point, as we can lighten them later. This painting is quite contrasty, so I'm very wary of keeping things very light and very dark. And I'll tweak them as I go, so I don't have to be perfect. And I don't really can tell what the color of these trees are, so as long as it's autumny, which is like orangey greens and yellows, you should be fine. And to put the bottom color in, like I don't even know what it is, like dirt, just make sure you don't go oversaturated, because it's mostly in shadow, so it will make it darker. So the fun part of putting these highlights in, these are very important to this painting, as it breaks up the floor and it shows you where the sun's coming from, etc. So on another layer, I'm still using the color fill tool, and I'm just blocking in where the sun goes. I'm using just one color here, but I'll change that in a minute. I got on the wrong layer there, so I'm just moving them around. And I just picked a yellowish color. It doesn't really matter right now because I'm going to change them. So rather than paint varying different parts of the highlights, I'll paint them all first, and then I'll change the color afterwards. So keep in mind, whenever the sun hits any surface, it will mimic the color of whatever's underneath and be a lighter version of it. So this is what I meant. I'm changing the highlights to the gray because there's gray underneath, and highlight, it'll just go a lighter version of that gray. And I used a trick called alpha lock on the layer, which means the paint will only go on wherever there's already pixels. So it just makes it easier to stay in lines. And now I'm tweaking the highlights a little bit and making them a bit brighter up the front. Nothing that complicated here. Again, I'm still on that same layer. So I'm putting these little curb things in. I'm not too careful. I'm just freehand drawing them. And it's good not to be too careful, because if you are, everything will look a bit rigid. So it's good to have a little bump here and there, because that's really what happens. And make sure to put the highlights on these too. So wherever those sun shiny bits are coming, make that a bit pink. So this wall has quite a lot of texture on the sides of the roads, but I'm not going to paint those. I like to keep my paintings quite simple, and I don't want too much texture on them. If I have too much texture, it goes to be a bit more realistic, and I don't want that. So I'm back to the trees now. And I need a bunch of branches. I'm not following the reference much. I'm just trying to make a guess of where these branches will go. And you can't really go wrong as long as they go in roughly the right direction. And make sure to put some branches where they kind of stick out from the leaves. So I'm highlighting the leaves now, and I keep this basic again, quite simple. I'll have the under layer being darker and put some like bushy highlights where the sun would hit it. And then using the technical pen, the only brush I use, I haven't used it much in this painting, and I probably won't throughout, because there's lots of big shapes here and I don't really need to use the pen. I only use the pen when it gets little. So I'm using it now though. So I said I don't want much texture, but you have to put some, or these trees will look like they're not leaves. And so really what I do is using the technical pen and the eraser, I just go around and make sure that the edges are not too flat everywhere. You can leave some edges flat, so I'm not doing every single one of them, but I want some texture into the distance where these trees match each other. Otherwise they'll all look a bit blobby. So for a few minutes, this is mostly what the painting is about, is getting these trees to merge into each other. So you do that by moving the colors from one bushy part to the next, and so on. So I'll speed that up a little bit because the process is basically the same, just all over these trees, and making sure the background sky pokes through now and again to make it look more interesting. And you'll notice the background sky looks very bright when you have the surrounding trees because of the contrast. But it's basically the same here. Is blocking where I want the highlights to go. Then using the eraser, I'll put some sky to come back through. And using a technical pen, I will add some texture into these leaves. And you notice sometimes I get rid of most of the background and just have some of the leaves coming through. And then one thing to make sure is to paint over some of the tree parts you have. So make sure it doesn't all go underneath. We need to make sure it goes underneath and over the top. So I'm adding a little bit of texture to these trees, not too much. You don't want to go too bonkers on the branches, because this is generally, other than the light poking through all the big trees, this is a fairly dark painting. So you want to make sure you don't over highlight the dark parts. I've done that many times in the past and never understood why. So you can have a few blobs on the trees where the light's poking through, but generally keep things dark. So what this painting is really about is the highlights. So highlights only really highlights on the floor and the road. And the only way that works is if you keep the things around it very dark. It could probably be even darker still. I probably haven't got the dark browny thing, maybe dark enough. But they're all on one layer, so if I wanted to go back now and just tweak that in Procreate, it wouldn't be that difficult. So hopefully you've learned a few things about trying to do these big trees. You could spend hours on these trees, getting them more detailed if you wanted to, but I like to keep things simple. So I've added a few fallen leaves here just to make it look a bit more interesting. They're not in the reference, but I generally do them anyway. And then I'll tweak some of the colors. You'll see me go around the layers, faffing about, and changing the brightness and all that kind of stuff. And I always do that down towards the end and see if I can make it better. I should have made those dark bits darker, I think, but it kind of works. So if you like that, check out my other paintings. In the bottom left there, you can see my last one was a bunch of fields and a countryside scene. That one was interesting. And give me a sub and a like if you like this one, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.